Okay, Thor Nystrom from Fantasy Pros, you're manifesting it in many places. JJ McCarthy, the Viking, and that would make you happy for many reasons. So make your case. Why should the Vikings trade up and get JJ McCarthy?
I think he's a great fit for Kevin O'Connell's offense. Number one, earlier in the process, I did my whole spiel about how he was underrated. It seems like he is now properly rated, so we don't have to do that argument anymore. But the physical tool set is all there. But that tool set, it fits really well for what Kevin O'Connell does in his offensive philosophy, which is to attack the intermediate sector between the hashes in order to open up the spacing for the one-on-one downfield shots. McCarthy, along with Drake May, are the two best in this class at those anticipatory tight window throws over the middle, muscling those in there. I like the athleticism with JJ McCarthy. You saw that at the combine, 6 fastest 3-cone time, irregardless of position, at 17 pounds heavier than his Michigan bio, which also checked the box of the size concerns that some had with him. And then also the arm strength is extremely apparent on his tape. And he put some data to that at the NFL Combine as well, with a 61 mile per hour max velocity throw, which was 1 mile per hour beneath the record, which Joe Milton matched. Josh Allen had it before at 62. The thing that I really like about the projection to the next level, beyond some of those things, is the athleticism and the arm strength work in conjunction with one another.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many quarterbacks that you see come into the league every single year where you have a strong arm and you are athletic, but those things categorically do not work together with one another on the field in conjunction. With McCarthy, they absolutely do. They work together in concert. When he is moving around and improvising, he takes his mechanics with him on the move. You hit the eyes are downfield. The upper body is always cocked to throw, and he keeps that lower body platform under him as he is maneuvering, so that if he sees a look that he likes, he's able to get that throw off right away with the correct mechanics. So the accuracy plays up, something you can see in the numbers. It was
Mm-hmm.
in the aggregate last year, 72% and change, and 71% and change while scrambling, which is kind of unheard of. But I think he's a really, really good fit for what KOC does offensively.
Yeah, and as you point out, I really like the way that you made sure to say, okay, athleticism, that's great, and arm strength, that's great, but do they? You have traits, right? So we can start talking in basic draft analysis terms. You've got traits and you've got skills. Skills unlock traits. If traits are not aligned with skills, they're wasted, right? Braylon Allen. If traits are not aligned with skills, they're wasted. And you're right that one of the things that JJ McCarthy's not a wizard like Caleb Williams, but he does make creative outside of structure plays that rely on arm talent, arm strength, and creativity. Just coming up, problem solving. Really, isn't that really what we're talking about? I don't mind that he wasn't the centerpiece of the offense in Michigan. It was a successful program. Why would it ain't broke, don't fix it? I kind of look at him like Ben Roethlisberger with the Steelers in his rookie year, or Dak Prescott with the Cowboys in his rookie year. Don't hold against him that he wasn't asked to do a lot. Let's talk about how he did on what he was asked to do. And but you will probably see a learning curve with reps. That's why you might like Michael Penix. I mean, you might like. We can argue about the range of outcomes for Michael Penix. We can talk about, is he going to be in the higher or lower end? And if you're on the higher end side of that, you have to like that reps, 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 and that helps map out your brain in the NFL, especially when everything gets sped up. But I think McCarthy to Minnesota. If it doesn't happen, it probably will be because they get Drake May. So would you be disappointed if instead it's a trade up to 3 for Drake May?
Only that's contextually dependent on what the price point is to
Sure.
do so. And I would even say that with regards to McCarthy, my only concern is that the Vikings, because you hear the people be like, oh, if it's your guy, you have to give up whatever it takes, which was the exact same thinking that led the Carolina Panthers
Oh, yeah.
to mortgage their entire future and set themselves back a decade in the Bryce Young trade. I and the way that I see this is I do not see a big enough, and I'm a
Yeah.
JJ McCarthy guy. but I do not see a big enough qualitative discrepancy between QB3 and QB4. And my QB3 is McCarthy, my QB4 is Drake May, to give up and to justify giving up your 2025 round one pick. For the Vikings right now, you look at the sports books, their win total, like for next year, I think they're tied with several other teams for the sixth lowest, i.e. a projected top 10 pick potentially. That's a potential enormous monster asset. I don't want to just be tossing willy-nilly enormous monster assets into trades. Again, that harkens back to what Carolina did last offseason. For me, I wait on the QB4. Josh Allen what Buffalo did in that draft would be a great example of having discretion and letting it come to you. But of course, you have to. With Kwesi right now, you're both playing the poker game with 31 other players trying to suss out what their intentions are. And of course, you can't get too cute. But if you knew that, obviously the quarterbacks are going to go 1, 2, 3. But if you knew that Arizona and the Chargers were going to stick and pick, the real question would become, what are the Giants going to do? If you called the Giants bluff correctly, that is what would allow you to keep both the 2025 round one and the number 23 overall pick. In that, like, I'm totally happy to take the fourth quarterback, whoever that is. But Drake May, to your point, he's a very good fit for the Vikings offense as well for some of those same reasons as far as attacking the middle of the field. Love the arm strength. The people that love Drake May, I see the exact same thing. He's got an absolutely awesome arm, and those NFL concepts over the middle, the anticipatory throws, everything like that. You see those all over his film. He has a lot of natural playmaking flair. He has some cool things about him. I like the thing where he's in shotgun and he gets it and he does the backwards bicycle setup as opposed to squaring, because he gets just a little bit longer to see the initial first few beats of the routes on both sides of the field. I also like the way that he does the pocket manipulation and the spacing in those beats after the snap to allow himself to have a runway in order to step into the throw, fully extend into throws. The only thing that concerns me, the two things, the obvious one everyone brings up is you see those occasional wonky decisions. The one I always think about was he was scrambling around against Clemson around the goal line and then just threw it right to a Clemson linebacker who was wearing a different colored jersey. There was no North Carolina guy. You could bring up several examples of this. But that's not even the biggest. Like, I feel like that is quasi correctable. The one where I'm a little bit more concerned, and it's just because of my experience doing this, there's a commonality between collegiate quarterbacks where their games play down at the next level if they have this trait, and it's the thing of struggling under pressure. And I know that people who love Drake May have given him the contextual benefit of the doubt. So I won't get into as much of that. What I noticed on his film, though, was, again, in those beats after the snap, I love the way that he manages the pocket, have zero problems with that. What I noticed was not right before he was about to get smoked, but like in a few beats before, when he starts to realize, like, oh, the enemy is about to be at the gate, like the pocket is about to begin collapsing. I noticed this propensity of him to both hit fast forward on his decision-making process, i.e. he's telling himself, panic, Drake, alert, you have to make a decision, like find someone, go. And then also, by extension, the mechanics get thrown into this fast forward thing where all of a sudden he is just, it's like, okay, I have to go somewhere. And then he's just throwing it, sometimes eschewing the lower body totally, and sometimes eschewing those upper body mechanics, where in these situations where you would have a beat or so to square your body and then potentially even do at least a modified step into the throw, that's something where it's one of those bullet flying things that I've found over the past 5, 6, 7 years doing these draft rankings. It's harder for guys like that struggle with that in college, for that thing to just be totally coached away at the next level. But certainly those are the two things you're going to work on with Drake May.
Yeah, and I like, again, Thor, that in the end, what you're isolating here, especially because we're talking about quarterbacks, is the psychological, emotional, even spiritual side of the position. Because why does his mechanics get sped up? Why is his thinking sped up? Because of the state. You said panic. I mean, he's in an altered emotional state, and that and then you get into the feedback loop of confidence, because we could talk about Drake May if he's picked at number 3 to the Patriots, and Drake May if he's picked number 3 to the Vikings, could have totally different careers.
Yes.
Completely different careers, where like one's a bust and one's a hit, and that's because of that element of position. And I love that we can talk about traits, we talk about production, we talk about a model where you plug all these things in, or you say like, what are the 5 most determinative stats for a position? But for quarterback especially, and Matt Waldman and I talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago, you're solving for X, and X is almost like you're putting on the helmet and you're inside of their brain and their body. You're not actually driving, but you're figuring out, well, how's their processing of visual information turning into this decision, and observing them over many reps. You're saying, okay, now I can put together, because Waldman talked about Kenny Pickett as a Steelers fan. That's painful. The Kenny Pickett for like 3.5 quarters was all right, and then in the fourth quarter, second half of the fourth quarter, oh. And you see in the NFL when the screws get tighter. So you're asking, what does this guy do when the screws get tighter? There's a lot of different ways the screws can get tighter, because the NFL, the screws are tight all the time. They're never loose. There's never, I mean, preseason or like the week 18 or something, they're always tight, and you wonder about that. And I like how you isolated that. You said something about doing this for 5, 6, 7 years. So let's talk about some broad questions, and then we'll get back to the 2024 class. So you've been doing this for a while now, Thor. And again, I always like to say, I don't want to embarrass you, I don't want to make you blush, but I know that you ranked the undrafted free agent classes, and you're the only other person I know that ever did it. And I knew you're a sicko, like I was, like when I had time to be back in the day. But you've been doing this for a while now. What is something you touched on something with quarterbacks and understanding pressure and how that can give you a better idea of predicting at least the range of outcomes for their career. What's something else you've learned? Like, what's something else that that like if you went back to the first year you were doing it, you'd say, hey, I know you think this right now, but you're going to see by doing this long enough that this is actually true.
Yeah, I would say broadly, like when the first couple years I did it for NBC and I had the big board, I I have both an advantage, but it was also kind of a disadvantage at first, where the draft work, a lot of guys that do it, they either do it's like NFL, they'll do NFL, some NFL stuff during the fall, some of these guys that do draft work and stuff like that, and then they're basing their evaluations off of cut-ups and work in the spring. Whereas I cover college football year round and have now for over a decade, and then after the national title game, that's when I dive deeper into the individual prospects and watch the cut-ups and look deeper into the analytical profiles, and then start comparing one guy to the next guy, and then putting them into tiers, and then stacking the positions, and then eventually get into the 500 board. And one thing I noticed in the first couple years, and you don't really doesn't become apparent to you until a couple years have gone by, and the failures just stick out to you, but it was the guys who were succeeding in college at a high degree. It was carrying too much of the day in my evaluation, and I don't think I was putting enough weight into traits. I would say, like the on-field stuff. I was prioritizing that more, and what I had seen over the years, and then the cut-ups as well. And not that I've gone completely the other way, but what I have labored to try to do is get into the data on the athletic profiles of what works and what does not at various positions in the NFL, and try to at least imbue my final evaluations with more of that. And then also dinging some of these guys who are really good college players, but who have profiles that fit athletically and body type and even play style type of guys that we have seen traditionally fail in the NFL.
Right.
They're just data points that you have to consider. And so I try to bring in all the context that I have from college, which is super helpful. Like, even watching the cut ups, it's super helpful. Like, I remember several years ago, like watching, like I have an idea of like what the games where a guy was injured, and I can
Uh-huh.
avoid those, and
Mm-hmm.
different stuff like that. And sometimes you can get into a trap if you don't know that context, where you'll pick the wrong swath of this season where a kid was gutting out an injury, like
Mm-hmm.
Frank Regnault his last year was playing through a high ankle sprain against the Heart of Arkansas schedule, and he looked terrible for these 3-4 games. But obviously, Frank Regnault was a very good player when he was at full strength, and that, over the years, numerous examples of this. But that's one thing I've tried to do better at is just considering more data and realizing that there is a place for the underwear Olympics, or at least the data that
Mm.
you get from that and the pro days and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I remember when I first was uh, on the draft scene, and you started to learn about these things, right? Like hand size. Don't take a quarterback under 8.5-inch hands, or 34-inch arms, or 80+ inch wingspan if you're going to play tackle, and so on. And it's felt really rigid, but it's actually, I think, based on years and years of what works and what doesn't. And it's actually knowledge that was gained by experience, not just some cocoon NFL. Not that the NFL sometimes is too rigid and too slow to change and adjust, but I actually think especially if you do like what we're doing, Thor, when you're tracking this year after year, and you see what kinds of players succeed, or even just where certain one of my most fun games to play, Thor, is like, where would this guy have gotten drafted 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
Yeah,
Right?
I love
I mean,
that. Yeah.
the game changes significantly enough. This is why
Speaking
football is
of
great.
Braylon Allen, he
Sure.
wishes he could play that game and do
Right?
it 25 years ago. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and traits and athletic profiles, and obviously it changes by position. Some positions maybe they're easier to find those skeleton keys than others. I think even with wide receiver, and we'll talk about this year's amazing wide receiver class, the NFL has started to catch on to segmenting out roles. So the WR position really is 3 positions, if not more, on the field, and it's the classic. Don't tell me what he can't do. Tell me what he can, and put him in a place where he's going to be asked to do those things. And just to bring it back to this year's class, and I want to get your thought on this, because I mean, I want to like Blake Corum, and I think it's Harbaugh, and it's for fantasy football, because we'll switch back to fantasy football mode. Fantasy Pros does great fantasy football. Lots of tremendous people over there too. We're going to have to go back to fantasy football mode, and hey, if Jim Harbaugh drafts him, he might have 3 or 4,000 yard seasons, But when I watch Blake Corum, I can't help but get that nagging feeling that backs like him blend in the NFL. They just tend to blend in. Not that the stats can't come from fantasy football in the right situation, but generally they get overtaken by players who have more physical talent to offer, or just are better. It's again, running back by committee 20 years ago was heresy to say that running back by committee was going to take over the NFL, and now it has. So there might be 3 guys on the roster that can do each part of the game better than you, even though you're very good in all the aspects of the game. But I want to go back and touch on this filtering out injured games. So warn the people out there. Who are some players that you could get thrown off the trail on because they were playing hurt in 2023, or because there's certain parts that just, the quarterback was hurt or whatever? If you have the right context, to ignore it. But when you look out there, some people aren't ignoring it. I know. I want to say maybe you mentioned Jalen McMillan as a player that you absolutely in your
Oh,
focus.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Jalen McMillan. Yes. Thank you. Jalen McMillan is a great example of this. I think, and I get into this in my write up with the receivers, but the situation with him and Jalen Polk, it reminds me a lot from last process of with the Tennessee receivers, Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt. I spent last spring months arguing against the Jalen Hyatt truthers that were, arguing until they were blue in the face that Jalen Hyatt was a first round pick. I was like, no, he absolutely is not. And my argument was that, in fact, a guy that on the same team that was viewed as this mid round afterthought, Cedric Tillman, was the better player and the better prospect. And of course, they ended up going back to back picks, and they had about the same kind of rookie seasons. And we'll end up seeing how their careers go. But the reason that it was viewed that way during the draft process was merely just because Cedric Tillman had gotten injured his last season, which opened up the opportunity for Hyatt to break out against bad competition. It just so happened that when Tillman was out, Hyatt got to run by a bunch of, it was like Akron. And then even when they played Alabama in that game, uh, Nick Saban, in one of his more regrettable career decisions, decided to put DeMarco Helms in the slot against Jalen Hyatt. And so Jalen Hyatt had free releases to run by this guy who ran like a 4.65. With the Washington kids, it's sort of the same deal. You go back to 2022 when Odunze, McMillan, and Polk were all healthy on the same field for that team. McMillan and Odunze were almost indistinguishable as the wide receiver one on that team. Now, of course, Odunze was more talented, but I'm talking in terms of the usage. And then this season, Polk did not take off and become like the guy that some people apparently I even saw him from a very I don't want
Peter
to
Schrager.
But, well, okay, you did it.
No, it's okay. I know. Okay. Hey, well, because we know at this time of year, Thor, not to interrupt you, we know at this time of year that, look, again, as I was deep in the draft scene from like 2007 to 2012, started my own little company, covered it for Bleacher Report, et cetera, and mock drafts are tricky because some people out there are reporting via mock draft what they know or what they hear or what they suspect. And some are saying this is what I think should happen or this is what the best fits would be. And then some are really just prognosticating and just letting it come to them and saying like, well, I'm going to predict on my own. And those things get blurry. So look, when someone puts someone in a first round that the consensus draft projections say doesn't belong there, that can be meaningful when it's someone like Peter Schrager. He would not. He's not trying to get clicks or something like that. Anyway,
for sure.
Anyway, but yeah, and the other thing I want to say before I hand it back to you is I just saw McMillan visited Cincinnati, which is like, that makes a lot. That I would applaud that pick on both sides.
I would like that, and I at least if McMillan is picked like he has been discussed this draft process, he is absolutely going to be a big time discount on draft day. So I will be applauding whoever takes him, assuming that is the case. But so last season McMillan gets hurt, and it ends up being, I think it was 8 games where he either missed the full game or the vast majority of it. He tried to come back for 2 games in October, Stanford and Oregon, and had to immediately leave because McMillan was trying to gut through this injury that he had, this knee injury, before he was 100%, but he couldn't cut on it. So like they had to yank him out right away. But in 4 of the first 5 games where McMillan was out, that's where Polk exploded. He goes over 100 yards. And so that's when it was like, oh, Polk comes onto the scene, whatever. At the end of the season, I thought it was very, very telling. So this is when we get into the heart of Washington's schedule. They're in the college football playoff run. They get to the, they play Oregon at the end of the regular season. Then they play, there's the rematch in the Pac-12 title game. Then they're in the college football playoff, everything like that. The high leverage games of Washington's schedule against the best competition, where McMillan had come back for the end of it. McMillan ends up coming back on November 25th. Polk disappeared at the end of last season. I think he had, let's see, it was, looking for the stats here. I think he had 23. Yeah, so over the last 7 games of the season, Polk had 23 catches for 323 yards and 2 touchdowns. In 2 of those games, even though Polk was healthy and active on one of the best passing offenses in all of America, he had 0 catches. And Jalen Polk, the guy that Peter Schrager says is a first-round pick, and a lot of people say is a top 10 receiver. I don't know about that.
Right.
That guy is not going to be able to play on the outside in the NFL. So he's this big slot guy who, whenever Washington had their 2 preferred receivers, he faded into the background over the last couple of years. And one final stat for you on this, Sig, just to encapsulate all this. Over the last there was 20 games the last 2 seasons where Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk were on the field together, healthy for the entire game. In those 20 games, Jalen McMillan stats: 124 catches, 1,657 yards, 14 touchdowns. Jalen Polk stats: 68 catches, 1,210 yards, 9 touchdowns. It was not a contest.
Mm-mm.
Washington's number 2 receiver easily was McMillan. That was the guy that they preferred. Jalen McMillan is a better player and a better prospect than Jalen Polk. The only reason people think different, it's contextual. It's just because Jalen McMillan suffered a knee injury in September.
Right. This is it. I mean, I love it. I love the way for you when you're talking about these prospects, Thor. It's like a movie is playing in your head, and you can go right back to all the pieces you put together, and it ends up in a story. I think I'm very much on the storytelling side, not the analytics side of this football media do-it-yourself thing that we're doing. But and like I said, check it out at Fantasy Pros right now. Your 10,000 word opus about this amazing wide receiver class. And like I said, you talked about Polk as a big slot. I mean, this is the little slot class. This is the Tank Dell, Wake, these little guys. There's any number of slot guys. There's a number of guys that you may be drafting just to play in the slot. And a lot of them have a lot more to offer than Polk. We'll see what happens with that. And really quickly,
like McMillan.
Yeah, like
I mean,
McMillan.
McMillan's a slot too. He's just a better one than Polk is going to be, is my opinion.
He's the crafty. He's him replacing Tyler Boyd is just poetic. I mean, it rhymes basically.
Yes.
When you look at their games, it's that old man. Tyler Boyd already had old man wide receiver game at Pitt, and McMillan has that too. Just to cheer you up too. Not that you need cheering up. Mike Garofolo. He was the first beat writer we had on our little fantasy show back in 2007. He said McMillan has visited the Chiefs, the Cardinals, the Jags, the Panthers, the Dolphins, and had private workouts with the Bills and the Vikings. There's your KJ Osborne. There's your KJ Osborne replacement.
I love it.
So this wide receiver group, and I would encourage everybody to go out and read it. It's amazing, Thor, that there's like 7 or 10 or 12 things now that, if we're being honest, we have to say you have to read this, and you have to read this, and you get the RSP, and you have to do Dane Brugler's piece, and you've got to read what Thor's doing. There's so many people, and what Scott Barrett's doing over at Fantasy Points. So many people doing such incredible work. And one of the things I really like, again, see, you do the same things that I do, where you put yourself in the article. In some ways, it's about the wide receivers, but in some ways, it's about how the wide receivers made you feel, or what they made you think, or your emotional ride as you like learn more about the prospect, or you learn about off field or medical, and then you try to weigh these things. Or am I worried? You'll say like, what worries me? So it's personal. And then the other thing that makes it real personal, of course, is all of the references to things I think that matter to you, right? I have just on a short list here, the Malik Neighbors, the Flying Ferrari, and you invoke Back to the Future. Do the kids still know about Back to the Future?
I hope so.
You know, you invoke Viking Funerals with Lad McConkey. Just the way that your idea of him before you started watching him and your idea after went up in a blaze. You invoke Professor X with Ricky Pearsall, and then with Javon Baker, I love this. You need boxing gloves and tap shoes. So what a combination, right? I mean, that's a picture, right? Here's how you're going to thwart Javon Baker, UCF, at the line. You got to have the pugilistic mentality of a boxer, but actually boxers have great feet. I mean, that's the funny thing, is you're kind of redundant in there, because we talk about boxers, and I think Matt Waldman was the first one that made this comparison. This is the way the quarterbacks negotiate the pocket, is the way that boxers and footwork negotiate the ring. It's a little bit different, more like war and territorial. But the thing I think that I appreciate the most about what you did from a football chop standpoint is that you're really honest. Keon Coleman, AD Mitchell, you're really honest, and you say like, hey, these things matter in the NFL, and they've got them, but these things also matter in the NFL, and they're spotty or not there. And you do take a stand, but that is secondary to explaining, hey, if this player ends up being a bust, here's the story that foretold that. And if this player ends up being a hit, here's the story that foretells that. So it's being really honest. That being said, let's talk about the wide receiver class in terms of like some superlatives. Okay. Who was the most frustrating wide receiver in this class to watch?
AD Mitchell. I would say I was Keon Coleman in some ways, but that actually was the previous thing within November at the beginning of the season. Keon Coleman was actually very good when the situation was there. Overall, it was easily AD Mitchell. I the flash plays are very fun. I think of I'm going to do, we just did Back to the Future. I'm going to do all these references from the 80s, or maybe this guy's even from the 70s. But if I did a real comp for AD Mitchell, it would be Dave Kingman for my baseball fans out there. It's you either get a dinger or you get a strikeout. Yeah. That is what AD Mitchell is. And my whole argument about AD Mitchell is I see him in diametrically opposite way to the conventional narrative about him. And the conventional narrative about AD Mitchell is like, look at this freak athlete. He's 6'2.5", 205, 998 RAS, low 4.3 speed. And then he has all these incredible plays, and he just needs a little bit of polish, and he could be this superstar wide receiver. But you have to shoulder some risk in taking him, whatever. I see that inverted where I don't see the ceiling with AD Mitchell, but I see a higher floor there. I see him as just the pop the top number 2 guy that the defense has to keep the 2 high safeties, because you have to respect his ability to get deep. The only thing he reliably did in college was hit those dingers. And by the way, only every now and again. He only did it in 3 games this year. His entire statistical profile over 14 games last season at Texas on a team that was really, really good throwing the ball, and NFL quarterback prospect, one of the sport's premier offensive play callers in Steve Sarkisian. Mm-hmm. He was playing across from Xavier Worthy and Jatavian Sanders, so you couldn't double him. In 7 of the 14 games, I think it was 30 or less yards. And then the entire statistical profile was off of 3 games. I think it was 2 of them. It was either 100 or 30 yards or more, or 140 yards or more. And then the third one, he got over 100. But those games, those 3 where he went off, it was just those dingers. It's the long ball. What he struggles with, it's the nuance of the routes where it's in the intermediate range, in part because he telegraphs the change of direction. I think he's a bit labored with changing direction as well. So that's number 1. Number 2, it's his speed. While it's awesome, once he gets going, it's build-up speed, right? So he needs that little bit of runway. Again, you have to respect it, which helps spacing of the offense. I think one manifestation of AD Mitchell's value, if I'm to give him credit for this, was seen in the amount of targets that Xavier Worthy and Jatavian Sanders got, and even Jordan Whittington, that were advantageous last season because of the extra spacing you get, because it's a math problem. You can't do a single high safety when AD Mitchell is on the. You have to respect, because you know that he can take the top off, but you don't really see a bunch of others. I saw people were putting out one random whip route he went on to try to be like, oh no, he actually can change direction and run. It's like, stop it. No, the general utility with him, it's the north-south thing, and he needs to build up to it. And yes, the threat of that even has value. And of course, you're going to hit some home runs with it when you got the shot. But overall, the consistency is not there. I think hoping for more, it's a bridge to nowhere as far as that goes.
Yeah, you described that well. And I love mixed sports metaphors, like the 3 true outcomes. 3 true outcomes for baseball: a strikeout, a walk, or a home run. That doesn't work if you're a wide receiver or a cornerback. You don't want the 3 true outcomes. That's not a good approach. And as you mentioned, this, I like the way that you draw a picture of, hey, let's start. And sometimes we have to revise this, or sometimes we assume the opposite. I think when we watch college tape, and because you're watching it you're watching all these games in a different context already anyway. We're assuming rational coaching, rational game management. The quarterback wants to win. The quarterback wants his job to be as easy as possible. And you've already twice in the show talked about the idea of a quarterback and a coach and a game planner choosing to rely on players that they feel are more likely to help them win. And Mitchell, like you said, was more of a tactical piece. And that might be why he's still going to likely get first-round draft capital, at least like top 40 draft capital, in a production profile that almost never gets drafted that high, or at the very least when people compare, they're like, these are busts. because they're players, as you said, a road to nowhere. Now, one real interesting thing I want to bring up, and I know it's anonymous scout, but it's Bob McGinn. It's Bob McGinn's been doing this forever, and yeah, and it's from Go Long, Tyler Dunn's site. Tyler Dunn's fantastic. Just doing vital work in terms of covering football in a way that just isn't covered that way anywhere else. And have you seen this, Thor? Have you seen what was in Bob McGinn stuff about Mitchell?
I did see
Diabetes.
the Bob stuff. It's awesome. I
Yeah,
love that series. What did he say about Mitchell?
diabetes, right? He said a third scout said diabetes is a major concern. You've got to look out for it. He's got to take care of himself. Every diabetic does. There's some questions. At the end of the day, he's a good player, but hasn't done anything overly malicious. He's probably just immature. He's got Garrett Wilson-esque catch radius, athletic ability, body control, but he's almost uncoachable. Before you even get to the diabetic part, he's going to do it his way. He's a little bit of a wild horse. You've got to see if you can harness him. And then if you do that, doesn't address the diabetic stuff in a more mature way, he's a boom or bust guy. You're going to have to assign someone to him because his issues are all about his diabetes and blood sugar, another scout said. When his blood sugar's off, he's rude, he's abrasive, he doesn't pay attention. It's why you get really, really bad character reports coming out of Georgia and Texas. But when he's normal and they get him normal by lunchtime, he's out of practice, high energy, best practice player for the football. Now, again, I don't like to put a lot in anonymous scout stuff, but I know that Bob McGinn's not going to put something out there to smear a kid or anything like that. And it kind of matches the nature of the AD Mitchell scouting reports, right? Like that picture is, and you describe it well, and you describe it well with a guy like Keon Coleman, who, again, it may just come down to the organization he lands in and how he's used, and then the confidence feedback loop, either positive or negative. Sticking with the wide receivers, but I'm going to reference something that you said last year. Because of you, Thor Nystrom, because of you, thank you. I'm in a lot of tight end premium dynasty leagues, and because of you, I have Sam LaPorta on a lot of teams.
Yes.
Like that, I feel like when we talked last year, I probably quoted you. I'm not kidding, Thor. I probably dropped your name like at least 7 to 10 times over the course of 2023, specifically referencing you that you said without Sam LaPorta, Iowa would have been one of the worst Power 5 offenses in 25 years. And I thought, wow, what a great way to say this guy's impactful. Okay, don't look at the stats, don't look at the measurables. Just know I watch a lot of college football, and this one guy, a tight end, not a quarterback, not a running back, a tight end, salvaged this team out of the gutter. That's how impactful he is. So give us the Sam LaPorta, if you will, from this year's wide receiver class.
Oh, I thought you were going to go tight end.
Well, give us the tight end first. No, if you had the tight end queued up, tell me the tight end.
So I would say the tight end would be Ben Sinnott.
Okay.
And actually, I ended up, and this actually made me. I'm actually appreciative of the chance to talk about this because I'm turning in my tight ends in my last position ranking column that I'm turning in today for Fantasy Pros, and I had a really hard time. I grapple with this for a long time. You know how obsessive I am with the comps. I do the 500 on the thing, but like I'm super obsessive with them. And like until I feel like I have the right one, I'll just obsess about it. And with Sinnott, my comp for him has been Sam LaPorta. And it makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I liked LaPorta a little bit more, but I hate doing comps where it's like, 90%, 95% LaPorta.
Right.
I don't do that because it looks stupid in the little box, when you lay the thing out or whatever. But I could not find a better dude. I couldn't find the 95, 92% Sam LaPorta guy. So the most accurate one that I could convey to the audience for Ben Sinnott, it became LaPorta. But
sure.
I'll tell your audience, I'm not saying exactly that it's apples to apples, but it's pretty close. The frame, the athleticism are very close. The collegiate profile, it's not too dissimilar. And Ben Sinnott, interestingly enough, grew up as a childhood multi-sport star in Iowa.
Yeah.
He was only overlooked by the Iowa coaching staff, along with every other coaching staff in America, because when he came out of high school, he was 200 pounds. He only got onto Kansas State because he had either a dad or his dad's buddy was friends with Chris Kleiman. and they talked to him, and then that's how Sinnott was able to walk on there. And then Kleiman came from NDSU, who has this vaunted, under that's where Kleiman came from before,
Mm-hmm.
and Kleiman had built up, and Craig Bull before him, this vaunted strength and conditioning program. That's why NDSU just wrecks the FCS every single year. Ben Sinnott got into that thing and built himself up into what he is now. And his frame, kept getting bigger, and he put the muscle on. Now he's 6'4", 250. He went from that, 0-star, walk-on kid, full, quote unquote, fullback, 200 pounds to 6'4", 250, 97th percentile tight end. He blocks, plays in line. He can shift him around. You can play him in the slot. You put him out wide. He can be the lead blocker in the backfield. Very good blocker, and he's a very good receiver as well. I really like his body control. It's sort of evokes like you sort of see in his tape, like the young, or the how do you say, the smaller person that he used to be.
Mm-hmm.
He used to play hockey when he was like 150 pounds, and basketball.
Yes.
You see some of that in his body control. He just sort of moves like the smaller dude. He's only been this size for like the last 3 years. And maybe that's why some people are lower on him. I don't know. Maybe the NFL, and we'll end up seeing on draft weekend, as a year ago at this time, when I was banging the drum that Sam LaPorta should be an early second round or late first round pick, and everyone, the world, thought he was a third rounder 1 year ago at this time. Mm-hmm. So we'll see with Sinnott. I believe that he is a top half of the second round type prospect based on the profile, based on the film, everything like that. But he's also, and this is another thing that is very similar to Sam LaPorta, big time tackle breaker after he catches the ball. He's got good hands. And then when he turns around with that ball, the defense has got a handful on their hands.
Yeah, I like that. Again, the story is important. And real quick from Dane Brugler's Beast on Sinnott. He first of all, he plays. I love the guys, the tight ends that play with this joy, right, in their game. George Kittle, Travis Kelce, Rob Gronkowski. I think LaPorta does too. They love it. They love that it's the most. I mean, Gronkowski was telling that story about like only when he got hit in a game and it like kind of got his body activated. That's when he was ready to play. And with Sinnott, in Dane Brugler's Beast, it says he didn't play tackle football until fourth grade. He didn't play football. He didn't play flag football because he couldn't hit anybody in flag football. So little kid Ben Sinnott is like, you don't get to tackle? I'll find other things to do. Let me know when I'm allowed to tackle. And then he bet on himself as a walk-on at Kansas State. So he's 0-star recruit. He has had to build himself up. And you tell that story about his body changing. And I'm reminded of Jacoby Jones from Lane. We saw him at the Shrine game in 2007. And he's a long-limbed guy, real high cut, like a great wide receiver, outside wide receiver body, but he could return punt. We're watching him return punts. We're watching him with the ball in his hands, and he moves like a small player. He moves like Darren Sproles. I mean, in terms of like his plan of attack, and he still has that suddenness, even though he's a long limb receiver. And we asked him about it, and he said it's because when he was not recruited really. He was little. He was shorter. I think he was like 5'9" or 5'10", and lighter. And that's the football player inside of him. And he blossomed, his body changed. So the NFL now is taking note. But as you said, the movement skills retained. Really quick, because I'm going to at least have a few minutes on off the rails. Really quick, give me your number one sleeper. So like outside of the consensus top 5 or 7, it's not that good of a class. But your consensus sleeper, your top sleeper running back.
Running back, I'll give you 2. I would say, I don't want to keep evoking Iowa, but former Iowa receiver Tyrone Tracy Jr. was a Purdue running back the last couple of years. Iowa's coaching staff tried to convince him to be a running back before he ended up going to Purdue. Purdue succeeded in that. He blew up last year, a little bit of an elevated age, but did not touch the ball. He has a bunch of tread on the tires in terms of that. Didn't have a ton of usage in college, but last year was fabulous on this dead-end Purdue team. The instincts as a runner certainly play, and the athletic profile is really, really good for him. He's like this juiced up slasher guy, and he just had, and I saw this when he was at Iowa. He just has a sense about him for how to get himself into space. I saw numerous times when he was at Iowa, he'd be surrounded by defense. I remember this game against Northwestern. There's like 4 defenders around him. He somehow got out of it, and then he's in the open field, and then he can hit the jets. And you saw that at Purdue. He's like this slalomy type back. And then when he's got the now he's hitting the jets downfield. He can also break the arm tackles. I think there's a lot of potential there. I think he's a sleeper. The other one that I think everybody sleeps on is Kimani Vidal of Troy, because he's unconventional. I love watching that kid. He's the, because I like the bowling ball kind of guys, but he sort of puts I'm sorry for a spin on the bowling ball thing.
Yeah.
Where a lot of times, I would say Blake Corum is a more conventional bowling ball kind of a fella, where it's like, it's the agility thing and, behind the line and then running through the arm tackle. With Vidal, he's straight ahead. It's like throwing the bowling ball at the pins. And it's sort of like disconcerting and discombobulating to the defenses, because he's so short, but he's also like jacked for that size at 5'7.5". He's 213 pounds of just muscle is what it is. And so he's hiding behind the offense only for a second, though, accelerates super quick, and it's all north-south. He breaks a metric ton of tackles because of this style. He gets on top of you so fast, gets through the hole so fast. He's not the joystick agility guy. It's not his game, and it's not his prerogative, but he has the subtle movements right before the contact point that turn the direct shot into the off-angle shot that he is so skilled running through. Last year, he finished number 2 in the FBS in forced missed tackles, which is the same thing that was the case for the guy I comp him to as last year in college. Jalen Warren, coming out of Oklahoma State, was also number 2 in the FBS in forced missed tackles. I think that Kimani Vidal translates as a very similar type guy in the NFL. Last thing I'll say, Kimani Vidal, both at the Senior Bowl against better competition, acquitted himself very well. The other thing, against Kansas State, and some of the times when Troy stepped up in competition, he acquitted himself very well. Kansas State and Chris Kleiman tried to throw 8-man boxes against him. Kimani Vidal was blowing through 8-man boxes. Very last thing, something that keeps you on the field in the NFL, pass blocking. Kimani Vidal might be the best running back in this class at it.
Yeah. Yes. And those two guys, those are the 2 top answers to, and there's a reason that smart football people are zeroing, and Lance Zierlein was stumping for Tyrone Tracy, and a lot of people like Kimani Vidal, I know Matt Waldman, among others. Okay, just a couple minutes, because I know you got to run. You're man in demand at this time of year, as you should be. Off the rails real quick. I mean, again, your work just radiates with the joy that it gives you to do the work. What's something else in your life that gives you joy?
It's sort of disgusting, because this is right dang near up the top. It actually is that. And the thing that I tell like younger people when I talk to them is like, you got to find the thing where it don't feel like work, because you'll just, that's the only path to outworking other people, is when it never feels like work. This is the subject I was obsessed with when I was a kid. My mom still jokes around about how around this month, when I was going back to when I was like 8, 9 years old, I would always have these scraps of paper downstairs writing my mock drafts, and I would print off.
It's all in us. It's all in us already, if you pay attention.
And around spring break, I would buy the magazines at the airport. And this is the reason why I do the work in the way that why do I do a 500 player big board with 500 comps? Seems obnoxious, right? Like, why would someone do that? I'll tell you why. It was because when I was a kid, when I went to, like I said, spring break is when because I'm from Brainerd, Minnesota. It's way up north. Like, the only time I could get these magazines, it would be at the, what are the Hudson or whatever? What are the things that are only in airports? Hudson bookstore?
Yeah.
That's when I could get the pre-draft magazines. Well, when you get them, the thing I was most interested in was how big is the big board on the back? Because I'm old enough where it was like early internet days. I think the internet came out when I was like in 5th grade or something like that, but it was like dial tone, and sometimes you didn't have a printer and everything like that. So I needed and big boards early on. It wasn't until later when maybe it was 4 or 5 years later when the ESPN started putting Mel Kiper's out. So I needed a big board where I could follow along. ESPN's ticker did not go fast enough for me as a kid, where I had the best available at all times. So I wanted a big board where, every year where I could cross off, so I could track it. That's why I do it. I wanted a bigger big board, and I also wanted a big board that would, when the draft was done, and then all of a sudden, one of my favorite, I call it the dessert draft or the second draft, which is the UDFA free for all that happens immediately after the conclusion of the draft, because some of the signings have sort of been nudge, nudge, wink, wink, agreed upon in principle in advance. They start, the news of those starts flying in right when after the Mr. Irrelevant pick. I also wanted to have a sense of like, where are those guys ranked? And that's why I go 500 players deep. It's essentially 2 drafts, so you also have a sense of that. But I guess that my other answers to that question, it would just be cliches. I love hanging out with my friends, like on off times. Like that's one way that I sort of unwind. Another one, a random one, is if I don't want to be around football or my friends, I will go to a movie by myself. Okay. Is like one way that I just sort of get away. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I that definitely can change your focus. But right now we're focused on the draft and Mr. Very Relevant, Thor Nystrom, over at Fantasy Pros. Check out everything going on there. And I can't wait to see your undrafted free agent class, takes, and everything else. We do it all for you folks. We love you all because you're so classy.